Hello, this is Jason. We are reading Who's Napoleon, Chapter 4 to Chapter 5. I hope you like it and subscribe, and let's get on to it. Chapter 4 The Little Corporal. Napoleon helped defend the new government of France, but the new republican system was quickly replaced by an even newer, called the Directory. And because the Royalists were still putting up a fight, the Directory sent for Napoleon. They needed his experience and bravery. On October 5th, 1795, the Royalists fought the Republicans in Paris, outnumbering them 6-1. But Napoleon wasn't worried. He had cleverly positioned dozens of cannons near the palace. He let his royalists almost reach the steps of the palace. When they were very close, he gave the orders to fire. Immediately, hundreds of royalists fell dead in the streets. It was a brutal attack. The Directory was saved, but many Frenchmen was killed. The Royalists called it a brutal massacre. The Directory called it heroic. Napoleon was promoted to full general. 7 months later, he was put in charge of the French army in Italy. Napoleon's status as a hero made him a welcome guest in Paris society. He received invitations to fashionable parties, but he was never very comfortable attending them. He was quiet and awkward around women. Then, in late October 1795, he met Rose de Beaubassin. She was the widow of a royalist who had been executed during the French Revolution. Napoleon liked Rose, but he didn't like her name. He decided to call her Josephine instead. Josephine was pretty and she was charming. Napoleon was in love. He wanted to get married. Josephine liked Napoleon well enough, but she wasn't quite sure she loved him. But in the end, she married Napoleon. He was head over heels in love. It is not in my power to have a single thought which is not of thee, he wrote to her in one of many passionate letters. Napoleon and Josephine were married on March 9, 1796. He was 26 years old. After the wedding, they spent only 2 days together before he went off to war. At the time, France was at war with several nations, including Austria and various Italian states. Napoleon marched his men into Italy. The combined Austrian and Italian troops would have 63,000 soldiers. If only they could meet up in time. Napoleon was trying to prevent that from happening. His 38,000 men marched 30 miles a day to get to the Italian soldiers before the Austrians could catch up. His enemies marched only 6 or 7 miles a day. The French defeated the Italians in the Pied Dot region, then chased the Austrians to the city of Lloyd, not far from Milan. There, a single narrow bridge was all that stood between the French and victory. The Austrians defended the bridge. There was only one thing to do: charge, at great risk. Napoleon's men took the bridge and won the battle. The men followed Napoleon's orders at Lodi, even though the odds were against them. They knew that Napoleon was very aggressive, but he wasn't careless. He only entered a battle believing he would win. So his men believed it too. Every battle, Napoleon gave an inspiring speech to fire up his troops. He also rewarded them with gold and valuables he took from his defeated enemies. For many years, French troops had earned very little pay. Now they were being rewarded with riches. They were also given awards and medals for their service. Napoleon would personally go down the line of troops and praise or pat them on the shoulder. The the soldiers felt as if he was one of them, and in a way, he was. Napoleon believed he could do any job in the military, and he sometimes did. That included everything from making guns to gunpowder to teaching strategy. At Lodi, he aimed the cannons himself, a job usually done by a low-level soldier. The men loved him for it. He called him Le Petit Corporal, which means the little corporal. Little referred to the lowly rank of corporal. Even though he was their general, Napoleon didn't hesitate to take any of the small chores the soldiers did. Napoleon ate the same food as his men. His favorite meal before the battle was fried potatoes and onions. On the battlefield, he wore an old grey overcoat instead of the colourful uniform of a general. But while his men saw Napoleon as one of them, he thought of himself as above all other human. The victory at Lodi convinced him of this. From that moment, I foresaw what I might be. He later wrote, "Already I felt the earth flee from beneath me, as if I was being carried into the sky." Chapter 5, Conquering Hero. In the story of his life, Napoleon imagined that he was a leader, and as his hero, Alexander the Great. But how did other people see him? This was 200 years before the internet. He couldn't share his victories on Twitter, and he couldn't Instagram the moment of surrender by the opposing commander. Napoleon wanted very badly to present just the right image to the rest of the world. So he began telling his story the way he wanted it told. He hired artists to paint pictures of his biggest accomplishment, including the victory at Lodi. He even wrote to the newspaper himself about how amazing the French army was. Napoleon was ahead of him in this area. He was one of the first military leaders in history to see how important it was to have public opinion on his side. He even started his own newspapers because reports of some of his victories were not good enough. 4 hostile newspapers are more to be feared than 1,000 bayonets, he said. He took an active role in creating his brand. He instructed the artists exactly how he should appear in the paintings. He told them what the theme of the work should be. He was even specific about how big the frame should be. Sometimes he made sure the artists showed him fighting heroically in the battle. Other times, he wanted the artists to show him at rest or conducting business in those paintings. Napoleon almost always has his hands inside his coat. That was to show how relaxed he was. He wanted to indicate to anyone who saw the painting that he was in charge. And the public loved it. Napoleon's legend began to grow. He was only 26 years old when he marched his army into Milan in 1796. He was greeted as a hero who would free the people from the rule of the queen. He became the political leader of Milan. In his story, he wasn't just a military hero who won battles, but also a man who made life better for the people he conquered. Napoleon knew he had a bigger and better army than many of his enemies. All healthy Frenchmen were required to join the military for at least 5 years. Many of them had grown up on farms and were used to carrying heavy loads in the hot sun. Making a 30-mile march was no problem for them. By 1797, Napoleon had the best army in the world. The British, though, had the best navy. Whether wood can swim, there I'm sure to find this flag of England, Napoleon once said. He meant that the British Navy was so good its boats were swimming everywhere around the globe. Napoleon wanted to control the trade routes that the British relied on to sail ships and cargo around the world. He had a plan to conquer Egypt and then build a canal linking the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. The canal would create a more direct route for ships to sail from India to Western Europe. If the British traders could sail past Napoleon in Egypt along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, they wouldn't be able to return to Great Britain. The plan to conquer Egypt started well. In 1798, Napoleon sailed from France with 400 ships. He took not only 40,000 soldiers and 10,000 sailors, but also scientists, historians, and mathematicians to study Egyptian culture. Napoleon had little trouble conquering the nation. The 4 million people who lived in Egypt at the time were led by competing tribes of warriors called Mamelukes. The Mamelukes used old-fashioned tactics and weapons to fight. When the Mamelukes charged at Napoleon's army on horseback, carrying sabers, curved swords, the French army shot them with their guns. The Battle of the Pyramids, as it was called, wasn't much of a battle. About 30 of Napoleon's men were killed, but as many as 5,000 to 6,000 Mamelukes died. Much of the Egyptian army was wiped out in about an hour. Napoleon marched into the capital city of Cairo and made himself ruler of Egypt. But then things took a turn for the worse. The British conquered Napoleon's ship in the Mediterranean Sea on August 1 and destroyed but all two Napoleon's troops had no way to return to France. They were stranded in Egypt until they could rebuild their ships. Napoleon decided to make the best of it. He began to study the culture he had conquered. The experts he brought with him wrote a large book on Egyptian culture and history. They made many important discoveries, including the Rosetta Stone. Napoleon called his time in Egypt the most beautiful of my life. Back in France, the government was once again becoming unpopular. Prices were high, food was scarce. Napoleon had heard the country was in trouble again, and on August 23rd, 1799, Napoleon abandoned his troops and sailed back to France on one of the 2 ships that survived. The British attacked a year earlier. The French people greeted him with great cheers. Who better to save the day than a man who had won battles all over Europe? On November 10th, 1799, Napoleon burst into a meeting in government officials in Paris called the Council of 500. 500 men had many different opinions about fixing France's problems. Some wanted a man like Napoleon to take charge. Some wanted to continue the government that had been in place since the end of the French Revolution. Some even wanted to go back to the monarchy. Outlaw, screamed the officials who wanted nothing to do with Napoleon. They tried to have him arrested. Napoleon's soldiers shielded him. His brother Lucien was a government official. He helped convince the Council of 500 to put Napoleon in charge. His shots were fired, but Napoleon suddenly became the ruler of France. He was one of the 3 men in charge in a new government called the Consulate. But at first, Consul Napoleon had the most power. He had successfully organized a coup d'etat, an overthrow of the old government. Chapter 6. So that's all we can do today, and I hope you like it and subscribe, and see you next time.